Welcome to Dark Sorcery. I'm Alfredo Martinez, and I have with me once again Guion Hughes. Guion, good to have you back on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And you're welcome. And today, this is Mesoamerican Spirituality 5. This is called Faces of Death. Basically, we're going to be talking about the Aztec gods of death and how in relation they are to Santa Muerte. Particularly the Aztec gods Mictlantecutli and Mictecacitlatl. Um, the Aztec god of death, and then the Aztec goddess of death, who rule the land of the underworld of Mictlan, which is where the dead go. But yeah, man, this is something similar in their roles to, let's say, Anubis, who guides you after you die. What do you think about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely. I believe that the term is called psychopomp. Where
Yeah.
spirits that are known to like kind of usher people into death.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and this is kind of a take on Santa Muerte too. Like the Grim Reaper is what we'd use in the West a lot too. I don't know if that's an official Christian thing or whatever, but like the Grim Reaper, somebody like in the hood, in a long cape, and have the sickle. So
Well, yeah, I
that's
mean,
usually this thing, and Santa Muerte kind of played on that a little bit too, but also when going back to the Aztec gods, like you said, and I just wanted to say too, I'm excited to start doing these. I know I wasn't in the first ones, but this is something I've studied
yeah,
for a
I
while.
think,
You know?
yeah, I think it's going to be some good input from you from a different perspective as far as the Mayan and Aztec cultures.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as I know, the Grim Reaper aspect was brought from Spain, introduced.
Mhm.
Before that, a lot of these Aztec gods had snake bottoms and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
along and then you had the goddess of death, and then which looked a certain way. But then when the Spanish came along, they introduced the imagery of the Grim Reaper.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of people will think, because of the human sacrifice and associate with the Aztecs, which it could it's hard to say because we really got the information from the Spanish, from Hernando Cortez and his crew that we're talking about, and some of it was really exaggerated, like where they said that like 60,000 people were killed in like 3 days, which would have to be like 300 a minute or something. I mean, so some of it might have been over exaggerated because they wanted, because I think the Spanish wanted to get more funding, saying, hey, these people really need Christ or whatever, right? So I
Yeah.
think they're coming, but another aspect too that's it. And by the way, these two gods, Aztec gods, have the skull heads, of course, because they are the king and queen of what their afterlife is, basically, like you said,
Right.
Mictlan. But there's also other gods, Aztec gods, that had the skull face, and skull was basically, I think to the Aztec religion, it would be fair to say a skull, maybe with some decoration around it or something. A skull was kind of like their symbol of their religion, like the crosses for Christianity.
Yeah.
So I think, which that's kind of like that also harkens back to the memento mori, that's like an old Roman where you'd hold up the skull and they'd say memento mori, just meaning remember you die. That's what memento
Mhm.
mori means in Latin. So it gave people a thing of idea of like, okay, well, I better do everything I can and work as hard as I can today because I might not be here tomorrow or I might not be here in an hour. You never know. You just remember you die.
Mhm.
So I think that skull imagery kind of like resonated with the Spanish probably because they probably were aware of this stuff. You know, these kind of ideas from there. Also, the death aspect. I've heard stories that the Spanish actually at first were really turned off by the skull gods and the human sacrifice and all that. Then they actually when they learned a little bit more about the people. I think they related it more to their religion, which is Christianity, which does have a man being killed in public, tortured to death essentially in
Yeah.
public. And
Their
so that
symbol
is
is a
kind of
symbol
a
of
human
death as well.
sacrifice in a way. It's, I mean, most Christians wouldn't want to say that's a human sacrifice, but it is kind of like a symbol of that.
It
It has to
is.
do with death,
It is a yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, their symbol is a symbol of death.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, just as in the tarot, the death card does not mean just death. It also means renewal,
Mhm.
beginning of new things.
Or just
So
change.
it's not,
Death
yeah,
is
and
change.
it's and, it,
Yeah.
and it's not really a bad thing if your symbol is, a man who's dying on a cross or a skull. I mean, it all depends on how you look at it.
Yeah,
You,
yeah,
you
and
you have these stereotypical mindsets that kind of flip out and see things with the wrong eyes. What do you think?
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think in general, and other religions, of course, have more have death symbolism, like the Tibetans and stuff like that. Even the skull and things like that. So there's other religions that have some kind of symbology that have to do with death, and I think that has to do with spirituality, and the reason that people reach out to religion a lot in the first place, is they're probably thinking, well, maybe even if I master this, this body and this life and this mind, someday I'm going to die and figure out what's happening afterwards. So I think religions are there kind of like for that, because a lot of I don't know if we'll ever get to scientifically where we could, you know understand exactly what happens when we die. With all the science going on now, maybe AI will tell us something, but nobody really knows, until they die. And then
Yeah, and
even
the
the people
thing
that have
is, you can't
near-death
really.
experiences, they could say, well, that was a hallucination or something.
I think it comes down to a matter of gnosis or channeling or just figuring things out for yourself, because you can't really trust AI 100%, because
Yeah,
who's programming AI? Do they lie to
yeah,
us?
yeah.
Of course, all mainstream society lies to us, but yeah, as far as the festival of the dead, the Day of the Dead, historically, Miteca Cihuaro would presides over that. But as far as Santa Muerte, there's not really an established day. I mean, some people say her day is December the 13th. Some people say it's November 2nd, but
Mhm.
there's not really a consensus as to what her day of veneration is, and or if there's not a complete agreement as to does she really preside over the Day of the Dead. Although it's becoming more popular, the idea that she does.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the thing too, and that's I think that's part of the reason they don't have a specific day, and they don't want to put Santa Morte as the Day of the Dead, figurehead. Even though Mickey
Yeah.
Casiwata was the what was pre the Day of the Dead, when they had the festival around the same time in Mexico before the Europeans. Mickey Casiwata was kind of like a lead figure that they do statues to and everything like that. I
Mm.
think that one of the reasons is because Santa Morte is like it's a kind of an outlaw religion. It's more of a folk religion. Obviously, the Catholic
It's
Church doesn't like that. They don't really see her as a saint, right? Obviously, and
right.
also they've actually I've watched some YouTube videos doing research for this video, that in Mexico now, people will put up shrines to Santa Morte, and the government or local police or other Christian groups will actually tear them down. So if they had a day and say, hey, it's Santa Muerte Day, and had a parade and everything, they'd probably get attacked in Mexico, maybe even here.
Well, I mean,
So
not
maybe all
only
over the
that is
world.
it's just that another reason is that it's Santa Muerte in Mexico kind of got has a bad rap,
Uh huh.
because a lot of people and authorities see that as beliefs saying of criminals. A lot of the drug
Yeah.
cartels
Mhm.
follow and talk to Santa Muerte and revere her. And so a lot of in some places in Mexico, that the cop will just pull you over, I guess, if they see that you have Santa Muerte,
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff in your
Yeah.
car or hanging in your car. It's kind of okay. Well, they must get in trouble. So I mean, for that reason, a lot of people, because you got to remember that Santa Muerte is followed by people of all walks of life, not just by the criminals or the prostitutes or people who break the law. There's doctors, there's lawyers, there's people high in position who also are associated with that, and some people just don't want their reputation tarnished.
Yeah.
And I think that's why there's not really an established hierarchy of Santa Muerte and this. Okay, well, this is her day. This is this is who's who as far as who is in charge of the organization, it's just underground. For a big part of it is for that reason. That's what I think. What do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean that's the thing and police organizations do this. What this reminds me of is when I was growing up and being punk and goth, you know. I mean
Yeah,
that was just that symbol of somebody just wearing black clothing or wearing eyeliner or something or you know anything like that. Or punk wearing boots or whatever. The law enforcement just says, you know, this is a red flag, you know. You see somebody with boots, they're probably a criminal, you know, they're probably a troublemaker, you know. You see somebody with spiky hair, you know, they're a troublemaker, you know. And the same
yeah,
thing with Santa Morte, you know. I've actually seen so you know, if anybody has a sticker on the back of their car with Santa Morte or a tattoo, I could see them totally getting, I guess literally the term would be profiled, you know, almost like how
yeah.
they
It
get in
would be
trouble for
profiled.
race.
Yeah,
But that is a form of profiling, you know. It's a, oh, I see this symbol. If they got a Santa Morte shirt, they might even give that as probable cause to try to search somebody or stop them, you know. Uh, uh,
I
so
guarantee
so
they would. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So and I've actually even seen so when I was doing the research for this videos of the police, you know, busting gangs and cartels, and they'll have the drugs, the guns. You know how they have like this showing drugs and guns. And this one actually had a statue, one of these statues of Santa Morte, and a candle that with it had her picture on it. You know, because that was like right next to the drugs and the guns. So that's like saying, you know, I mean that's part of the evidence, basically, is what they're trying to say, right? Because internally,
Well,
maybe not externally, but internally, they probably may have to talk to, if they get questioned about why they stopped them or why they looked into this house. They could say, well, there was a memo put out by the lieutenant and it said Santa Morte, you know, look into that, you know. So I mean,
mm,
it is definitely along those lines, and I think that's why it's more of an underground religion, and just probably by the nature of having the skull and having it associated with some people
well,
back to the natives, which you know, I think the mainstream Mexican government may want to be a little bit less native in some ways, you know, because I was in Mexico City in the '90s, and I know there's this state called Chiapas that has a lot of like natives that speak the native Nahuatl tongue, and
mm,
they actually were doing protests and doing things like that, and a lot of them were just getting killed, you know, at that time in the '90s, right? I don't know. I didn't actually get a chance to look into the conflict now, but I mean,
right.
literally, like you know, people would drive through them, and you know, and it's Mexico. It's not as hardcore about the rules and the suing, you know, that you know. I think,
Yeah.
especially if it's like some natives that are living kind of in the country, you know. So that was going on a lot when I went to. I just went a couple of, you know, I just went to Mexico City once, um, and followed that after that because I was you know, interested. That was a big subject at the time in the '90s, you know, about the natives. I'm not sure if they ever how much, you know, that connection. I couldn't really see that there was any hardcore native groups that had the Santa Morta. I think a lot of them maybe go directly into the Mictlantecuhtli and you know, the traditional, what they call the Aztec gods, which also were the tribe, actually I believe called themselves the Mexica, though they really did that. And
Yeah.
but I mean, modernly, within the last the information I got is within the last 100 years, anthropologists started calling it Aztecs after Aztlan, which Aztlan is the mythical, possibly mythical land that the Mexica came from up north. So a lot of people say call California and like our area, like the Southwest or whatever, uh, Aztlan. You know, a lot of
Yeah.
Mexicans.
And that was
I've heard that. I don't know if you've heard
a
that.
big movement in the '90s of
Yeah,
Aslan, where people would wear these Aslan shirts, and that meant
yeah, yeah, yeah.
give the Southwest back to Mexico, make it
Mhm.
Mexico again. I do remember that. But but
And
yeah,
that's where
man.
the Aztecs came from. You know that they
Uh,
started, you know, as Aztecs, you know, and then
well, not only
Aztecs with the hard Z sounds a little bit more. Because I mean, I've heard, you know, there was a lot of like, you know, negativity about that. I mean, you know, I was a kid in the '70s, right? And a teenager in the '80s. So and here in LA, there's a lot of Mexican people, a lot of Chicano people, whatever you want to say. You know, I don't know if you. That's another thing. Is there a differentiate sometimes here in LA? I don't know in your
yeah,
area between maybe first generation Mexicans or Mexicans that just came here, you know, and they still have speak Spanish mostly, or they have an accent. They usually refer to them as paisas, you know.
yeah.
I
It's
don't
the
know in
same
your
way
area
over
if that's
here.
the same.
Yeah,
Paisas, and then there's more Mexican, Mexican or Hispanic people
Well,
that were born here.
the
They
paisas
call
are
them more
the
Chicanos, or the
yeah
negative term I think is
the paisas are
pocho.
the ones who come from Mexico, and then the Chicanos are the ones that are born here in the States.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it's
And there's some
it,
rivalry between those two too, and I
yeah,
know.
the cultures are different. Yeah, they
Yeah,
do
yeah,
clash from time to time.
so like in the which I don't think that's fair. I mean, I've heard people being criticized, for Mexican people born here, or you could say any Hispanic, but Mexican because we're on the subject of the Aztecs and stuff. Mexican here and they don't speak Spanish, and they're like, "Oh, you're not really Mexican." They get put down. But I think Spanish is just as much a colonizing language as English. So if you're speaking
It
Spanish
is.
or
Well,
English,
it is. You got to
yeah.
remember, it is a European language.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it's from Spain. It's not really from
yeah,
Mexico. So when someone, because I mean, that's what I say. The obviously, there's a rivalry and some of the so the story I'm thinking about is when I was a kid. There was another kid and he was all into the Aslan and Mexican pride and all that stuff. So he
yeah,
would he would actually and our teacher was also Mexican, right? He was also a Hispanic Mexican guy, right? But he was probably born here. He was a teacher and stuff. He was all official. This is like in the 1980s, like in junior high school, right? So this kid, every other thing was the Aztecs did this, the Aztecs did that, the Aztecs invented zero. The Aztecs, and
yeah.
so the teacher and another Mexican guy. So I mean, but obviously that's why I say there's a difference. He finally like called this kid out and have everybody laugh at him and humiliated him over that. And he's like, "We've heard enough about the Aztecs, right? Like you're being an ass about the Aztecs." And he's making some jokes about that. And so I think that's why they put the hard Z, because Aslan. A lot of times they say Aslan instead of Aslan, right? But I think the hard Z was used more for the Aztecs for that reason that there was jokes about that in the 70s and 80s when the movement was going good as a counter, and a lot of it, you would think that would be mostly like what white people would do or something, but a lot of it was other Mexicans, but they were just born here and more like more established here than the people that felt that they were like harkening back to the
Yeah,
Aztecs and the Nahuatl people and the Mexica and all that stuff.
yeah, definitely. And back to the whole thing about um, why some people try to shy away from letting it known that they're a follower of Santa Muerte is also because there's sacrificial rites associated with following Santa Muerte. As far a lot of the drug cartels
Uh-huh.
will do what they'll capture their victims and they'll do sacrificial rites. And
Yeah,
the
yeah,
police
yeah.
find this stuff, and then it causes them to stereotype people. But another thing I was going to mention is that um, we spoke a bit about Mictecaccihuatl and Mictlantecuhtli, the god and goddess of death in uh, Aztec folklore. Then you have Santa Muerte, and then in some places like Argentina and certain other Latin countries, you have San La Muerte, which is the male saint of death.
Oh,
So
okay. Hmm.
depending on where you're going, depending on what country you're in and what part of the world you're in, death is either seen as male or death is seen as female.
Hmm.
Now, the way I see it, if you're, if you're talking to the Aztec gods of death, and then you switch over to Santa Muerte or San La Muerte, it still doesn't matter because you're still speaking to death. Um, I think after we leave this physical plane and you ascend so high, duality ceases to exist. So to
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
it doesn't
yeah,
matter
yeah.
which one you follow. You're still speaking to death either way. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I totally. I mean, I think it's the same thing, and I think that kind of goes into a like chaos magic type of thing, where belief is the point. Where they say belief is tool. So belief is the point. As long as you believe in it, it's happening. And then going back to what you were saying about the negative, the sacrificing and stuff. I know, and this is in every culture. They call it different things too, like you were saying in different countries, right? So in the Mexican culture, generally, I think they call it brujeria, or there's also a paleo mayambe, which is actually from
Yeah,
the Caribbean, but it's brought over to to the mainland and to the Hispanic countries, through Mexico and Central and South America as
Yeah.
Paleo Mayambe. So there was a big case of a guy, I can't think of his name right now, but he was in a border town, and he was actually abducting tourist American tourists, like spring breakers and stuff like that, because they wanted that energy and stuff, and they found all of this, human sacrifice stuff, and later on they had his book, and it turned out that the cartels and other criminal organizations were actually hiring this guy to do this for them, so they didn't have to, because it's really risky, they wanted that done still, but they didn't, and there's always going to be stuff like that, they call it different things in different places. It's the whole idea, and this is kind of like what Santa Marta has become. It's the whole idea of like the Caribbean, like in voodoo, like in there's a kind of a shadow religion that's a little bit more dark side, like, so there's a Catholic saint, like for example, I have a statue here. This is a Catholic saint, Saint Martin de Porres, right? And
Mhm.
he's one of the very very few like black or mixed saints like that, and then there's Saint Gerard, who's actually a saint of death. And just to tie in a little bit to the way other people do this, is these statues are actually used to summon the Leo, Baron Sambi, which
Yeah.
is their psychopomp. That's their
The
deity of
Loa.
death in
You
in,
know,
in that,
yeah, and when you look into Santa Muerte and the practices and the folklore and stuff like that, you will see some similarities to people who speak to the Loa and
hmm
people in some of the Caribbean religions, Santeria and etc. You'll see
Yeah,
some
yeah, yeah.
some
And every one of
similarities.
those are associated with other saints, with legitimate Catholic saints. And what they say in
Well,
the daytime, they're real Catholics, that people that practice voodoo, and even hoodoo or folk. Hoodoo is more like a folk kind of like magical system, where voodoo is an actual religion.
right.
That's
Well,
my
the
understanding of it.
well the same thing with followers of Santa Muerte. Most followers of Santa Muerte consider themselves Catholics,
Oh yeah, yeah.
but because the Catholic Church won't officially recognize Santa Muerte as a saint, it's a
Mhm.
folk saint, and so yeah,
Yeah.
it gets pretty deep,
Well,
man.
and I think what it was it, and since we're on the dark sorcery side today, I think where it came from originally too is a lot of these people maybe are asking for things that the legitimate priest in the Catholic Church would say no, like, oh, help my husband not go to prison or something, right? Maybe they'd be like, well, I mean, I think
Yeah.
the official Catholic Church would say, we're not giving you a saint to pray for your husband to escape justice, or even like if people want to pray for their criminal enterprise to actually bloom. I mean, probably the legit Catholic Church would probably turn them in, or maybe, I mean, who knows? Maybe they'll be sympathetic,
Well, I
but but Santa
yeah.
Muerte would probably always grant whatever you wanted, whatever it was, without judgment like that. I think so. That's where a
There's
lot
yeah,
of
there
this
really
history
is
comes from too.
no judgment as far as what you want to petition Santa Muerte for,
hmm
because there's the cartels, of course, praying to her that they'll be successful with their
hmm
missions, and even if it's to kill somebody. And then you have the people who are escaping the cartels who are praying to her for protection from them.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so there's really no judgment. You can pretty much ask her for to help you with just about anything, whether it's
Yeah,
considered
yeah.
moral or immoral. And I think that's another reason why um, Santa Muerte has become more popular, particularly also in the United States, which is in the United States, Santa Muerte is growing in popularity. I mean, over here, you go to the swap meet, it's big. There's
Oh yeah, for
a
sure.
lot of that stuff
Yeah.
all over, and I'd say probably the biggest, it's biggest in Los Angeles. You guys have a lot of uh, a lot of shrines and places of veneration,
Yeah,
and
yeah. They have a
it's just
basilica
growing in the
here. I
U.S.
went to
What's
before
that?
a bit. They call it the basilica, and I'll have to send you the link. But me and my friends go there sometimes. I mean, it's just got a huge, life-size statues, and then statues all around it, and then of course they sell it, whatever. And they have practitioners there that will actually do the thing which where they kind of like shake you with leaves, and then they break an
Yeah.
egg and put it in a cup. They I don't because we were raised Christian, we didn't have so much of that folk stuff, but that is a traditional like Mexican thing, is to actually get the leaves, and and they burn a fire underneath people. I don't know if you've seen that one. They also
Yeah.
do the egg where they rub your whole body with an egg and then break it and try to divine that. So I mean, these are pretty common practices, and a place like the Santa Muerte does that, as a service, as well as selling your
Uh,
own incense and candles and whatever, so you could do it at home. But and it also, when I talk to the people there at the, I think they call it the Church of Death, right? The Church of Holy Death, right? Because Holy
right.
Death is kind of like how you translate Santa Muerte in English, I guess. That's the
Hmm.
closest they come with it. They call it the Holy Death, right? And so they were saying, that they actually have this shrine in Los Angeles, and it's a store. It's actually an occult store, right? And they have people do services, they healings, all that stuff. And they also have a place if people do like Santa Muerte, but their parents or their roommates or whoever doesn't want them to have a home shrine for it, then they could go there. Which is,
Hmm.
that is a lot of people, I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people,
Of course, like
especially in Hispanic culture, they would be like, they wouldn't want you to have a Santa Muerte statue necessarily, depending on who they are. If they are legitimate Catholic and go to church all the time, I'm not sure. I could see even a Catholic priest would probably say that's not a good idea. I don't know. I mean, I could
it'd
see
probably
the
be
big
the
picture.
it would probably be the younger people who would have that.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
I mean, I think that since Santa Muerta is very universal as far as what you can ask her for, um, I think a lot of people, most people probably tend to just work with the black aspect because the three main colors of Santa Muerta that people tend to work with and have set up on their altar are the white one, the black one, and the red one. Of course, the white is for purity and purification and things like that, cleansing. Black is for black magic and vengeance, stuff like that. Red, people
Mhm.
tend to use that for passion and love, and some people use it for money. But for black, a lot of people will just use the black aspect, and whether it's for healing, whether it's for vengeance, whether it's for prosperity or whatever, because
Mhm.
some people view it as you know the look at the universe. Everything is born out of the darkness. So
Uh-huh.
since everything is born out of the darkness, just use the black aspect for just about anything. What do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I have a shrine here, and we can post pictures or whatever later, or
Yeah,
that actually, I have one that actually has, her cloak is money. It's American dollar signs, right? And I mean, it's almost like they
right.
they they kind of have a fabric, like you could get like a joke fabric or something that has $100 bills or whatever. That's what she's cloaked in. I have another one that's red, for love or passionate things, and
Yeah,
then a black one there. So in my practice, I have that. And you're right about the swap meets. I actually get these a lot because I think that people sell them used a lot, because people get busted or whatever, and they just all their stuff just gets thrown in a storage unit, or just or somebody comes and collects their stuff and they just find these. They're like, what do I do with it?
right.
They probably don't feel comfortable putting these kind of things in the trash. They might think that'll be a bad thing on them, so they're kind of stuck with it when they have to clean out a family member's house or whatever. I think,
Yeah,
and then they end up at the swap meet where people are selling for like $5 or whatever, or just
yeah.
take it.
I mean, I'd say that's probably the best place to go as for shopping, for Santa Muerta
Yeah,
stuff
yeah,
or making the
yeah,
most
for sure.
connections. But
For sure.
but
I mean, this is so I wanted to go because back to the aspects of the Aztecs. I wanted to show this book a little bit. We could
yeah,
have maybe that on the photo. So this is the Jade Steps: A Ritual Life of Aztecs. Uh, Burr Cartwright Abundance is his name, the author of this. And it's kind of an old book. I read it a while ago, and I kind of revisited it for this particular thing. But this goes into all the different things. What it emphasizes the Mikti Waddle and her husband, which that's another thing. These things about the names are really hard for me, and it's almost a little triggering to use the names because when I was going to East Los Angeles College and I was getting my substance abuse counseling degree thing, right? I wanted to take a class just for fun, And just because I was interested, I took Nahuatl. You know, they have Nahuatl, or I think the official name of the class is something like traditional Aztec languages or something, right? And it's a real rabbit hole. People don't realize, you know, it's not just, you know, because you know things in it's really interesting, you know, things in English, well, especially like Spanish and French and Italian, and people, you know, people that speak English usually speak one of those languages kind of a little bit, right? So, but what's interesting is because of this aspect of the Aztecs and Mexico being different with the Mexica and all that, the Mexican Spanish is mixed with the language of you know, of the Aztecs, of Nahuatl a little bit, right? But it's kind of like,
Mhm.
you know, it's Nahuatlish, you know how they say like Spanglish or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
Nahuatl. Because so for example, what I'm getting at here is you know, in French to say come here is viens ici, right? In Spanish it would be ven aquí, which is almost like saying it with a different accent, like it's almost like a different accent, really. You know, ven aquí,
Well,
VSC, you know?
and yeah, and with the Latin languages, some of the words are the
Yeah,
same, especially with
yeah,
Spanish and Italian. You have some of the words that
yeah.
are the
But
same.
if you know, I mean, it's really easy if you know in French that you know, I mean, come here is totally different in English. But if you know a little bit of French, you probably know a little Spanish. You could understand, you know, VAC or Ven aquí means come here, right? But in Mexican Spanish, come here is ven para acá, right? And para acá, I'm not sure where, you know, I don't know enough about Spanish. I don't know if you know, but where that comes from, I think it maybe comes from the native or you know something like that, because it's so different than anything else in Spanish or French I could find. But I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think the language is mixed with that. There are differences in and especially like in the cuss words and stuff like that. You know,
Yeah,
where in the Caribbean they say coño or something like that. In Spanish they'd say chinga or chingues
yeah, you know,
or pinchy. I mean, these are like their own custom things, which I'm not sure if those
e-
come from Nahuatl. I think the main point is that you know
I
each country, even if they speak Spanish or they're Latin American or whatever, they have their different Spanish, and people
well,
could tell by their accent, you know.
I wouldn't doubt that somehow some of that Nahuatl mixed in with the Spanish, especially when the Spanish, conquered and took over.
Yeah, yeah,
And said, okay, this is what we're speaking now. Of course, they're going to have their old, language habits and kind of maybe twist some of it. So I think maybe that might have something to do with why a lot of the Spanish is different from Spain than in Mexico and Central and South America
yeah,
for maybe
yeah,
that same
yeah.
reason.
Yeah, so getting back to my story, for those reasons, I wanted to take a Nahuatl class to see if there's how much of that is in the Spanish that I grew up with, kind of, you know, and so you know, taking this class, it wasn't what I was expecting. And you know, this is in East Los Angeles College, and they have a big Chicano studies program. People can major in that and everything, and they got protesting clubs and all this stuff. So of course, right, because it's East LA, right, and and so when I went there though, there were some pretty hardcore guys in this class. You know, they were big. You know, like straight up, you know, looked like Mexican mafia or cartels, or I mean, they were tough looking, like I guess you'd call them cholos. They had the tattoos and you know, so I go, well, you know, hey, you know, this is the kind of I was expecting some of that, right? But so come to find out that Nahuatl, which there's actually like 38 variations of Nahuatl itself, right? The organizations that, you know, a lot of times that were criminal or secretive were using Nahuatl to communicate. And then, but they get together and decide what the dialect is, what the code is, because even coded English could be a little hard to understand. Coded Spanish a little hard, but obviously the cops speak English and Spanish pretty well, and even the coded versions like the slang, street talk, or whatever terms or
That's
codes,
very
you know.
common to mix Nahuatl. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
so they were using the waddle, and they were talking, and you know, as part of their job, as you know, maybe as doing some secretive stuff, and as you know, also, you know, for their spirituality or whatever, their identity and everything. So anyway, there was a couple of people, including me, because you know I have Caucasian features and everything like that. So there was a few people they were looking at, you know, like what are these guys doing here, kind of thing, right? Which you know I was just
Yeah,
going to just, you know, and I even introduced myself in the class that I'm just interested. I was raised in Southgate here, so I mean, you know, even though I have the Caucasian features, I was raised kind of Mexican or whatever. But so come to find out, they were actually side-eyeing some of these guys because, me included, which I dropped out right away because I'll tell you, it's because I guess they believed, or I don't know if it was true, that the police were sending people over there to learn the waddle so they could decipher, cartel transmissions or codes of Mexican gangs here or Hispanic gangs or MS-13. What? So I don't know if even the South Americans were doing this kind of stuff, or the Central Americans, like with MS-13 and
Mhm.
that. But the Mexican ones were definitely doing that, right? So one other guy who was actually another Mexican guy, but they could just tell, he was there to try to learn about he was suspected of working with the police, and the guy actually got beat up. And that was enough for me. I just dropped the whole class and kind of avoided that day. I didn't even go to school on that day, and hopefully I didn't run into any of those people, right? And if I
Yeah.
did, I could probably talk it away. But the guy got beat up, and I heard later on he actually got killed. I didn't even want to look into it to confirm it or look like I was interested because
Yeah. Well,
I don't want
probably.
no
I mean,
problems
that
like that. So
what
I
you
heard that that's
described.
how
Yeah.
hardcore they. So it's almost like that's how much of a rabbit hole. And when people do, if they do look into this on YouTube about learning to waddle, I mean they literally have to tell you how to like place your tongue and make sounds that we don't even make in English. So it's very
Yeah.
different than English and even Spanish in a lot of ways. Spanish is a lot similar, but I think that's because they've mixed. But English and Nahuatl is very different, and it's almost like they have to teach you how to like the th that's on a lot of Nahuatl words like Quetzalcoatl or Mitzicatzihuatl, right? The tull, it's not even a sound in there. It's a sound we don't really make. It's just putting your tongue on the roof of their mouth and actually pushing air through. So it'd be more
Yeah.
like Mitzicatzihuatl, like you make this, like that, and they understand that because it's face to face. There's no community, there was no writing, like written communication or
Well,
phones or
I
anything.
mean,
So they
what you
knew.
described is very common. I mean, it is very common for the Mexican mafia and different Mexican gangs to learn the Nahuatl language to talk in code. And yeah, they would get pretty serious if they suspected anyone was working with the police in an environment
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you made the right call by just getting away from the class. Don't even
Oh
bother
yeah, yeah,
with
yeah.
that.
No, and I didn't even know at the time, but it actually in it's this whole rabbit hole you could go down. I also learned some stories in there that were interesting about like one guy was showing that he actually had because sometimes they use Aztec numbers too, which are just kind of dashes and
Yeah,
dots. You've seen Aztec numbers before, right? I mean, that's what they commonly call, right?
right.
So they use those numbers too.
Yeah,
So because if you get like a 13, everybody knows nowadays. Most cops and everything knows 13 represents the uh, uh, the 13th letter of the alphabet, which is M, and then that would stand for Mexican or
Mexican mafia.
marijuana
Yeah,
so that's why a lot of
right.
13 like the MS-13 they even though
Well, a lot
they're
of them
not
have
Mexican, they were
those.
paying homage to Mexican by putting the 13 in their name even though they're
Right.
Salvadoran, just because they're showing like, hey, we're kind of bowing down to the Mexican mafia at least or whatever, right? So that's why they put the 13, and so the 13 is like that. So there's also a really a coded term that a lot of people don't know though, which is 2-5. Which I think is really interesting. So 2-5 is slang for a snitch, essentially, right? So if somebody says, "Oh, that guy's a 2-5er," that means he's a snitch. He's a
Yeah,
he's not.
there's
You know,
different codes and numbers that people will tattoo on themselves, and
yeah,
a lot of them will put the Aztec numbers on
yeah,
them.
yeah.
Or
Yeah. So yeah,
different
one of the
codes.
they had a thing, and the 2-5 you don't want to be associated with. You want that to be even secret too, because that's known as a gang snitch. And where that came from was interesting. Where the code came from is so they have so so I'm trying to see how I can put this together. It's an interesting story the way that okay. So in prison, when somebody snitches or their special needs, like they're have a sex crime or something, they go to some place called protective custody, right? So PC, right? That's what they call it for short. And then people say, "Oh, it's Punk City, this and that." So even if somebody says, "I'm scared of, I'm getting beat up all the time," they'll put them in PC, right? But a lot of them are a lot of them are sex offenders or gang snitches. Those are like the biggest two. So the people that snitch on the gang or the gang was after them, so they just told everything or they defected. They have to go over here to PC, right? And so in Spanish, you would just say it the same way almost, but it's pese, right? Pese, right? And so they coded that to be like pese is protective custody. That's the snitches basically, right? So then the reason it became 2-5 is because I don't know if the Spanish you were raised with. So when somebody asks for a quarter in Spanish, they're like tienes pesente, pesente,
Oh,
pesente, right?
okay.
You know,
I see what you mean. Yeah.
so, so pesente is give me a quarter, right? And you have a quarter, you have change basically, right? So
Yeah.
but usually means like a quarter for the meter or whatever, So that sounds like PC pasente and then 2-5. So that became the 2-5er. So that becomes like a code word for snitch, two
Yeah. So
five
that
like
is
that.
interesting. That is
So
interesting the way you broke
and
it down.
I learned all that in that class because that was just
Mm.
people talking on the side or having side conversations that somebody has Aztec numbers spelling out 2-5, to show P. So you have to
Yeah.
really got to really have code on code on code. I mean, this is truly a cult, I mean, it is hidden literally, So I mean, it's really interesting the criminal codes and stuff, and these are happening modernly. I'm sure they're still when they still say 2-5 or the 2-5ers or I mean, it's became an established gang. The 2-5 is versus the 13 or whatever. So they're clashing and stuff. So it's really interesting how all this stuff comes
All
together.
this stuff goes really deep. I mean, not even just with the numbers, but with, even the pantheons and everything and why people do the things that they do. But
Yeah. I mean,
but it's
one thing that I wanted to emphasize after is after reading this book, it does say that almost all the information we got. I think there's only one codex that actually is something of a Nahuatl document or whatever. But most of the information we get from the Nahuatl people and the Mexica and everything it's kind of like witchcraft, like how witches want to think there was this real robust religion and everything in England, but most of the stuff they're coming up with is coming from people that were persecuting them. Like the witch trials, where the
mm,
were most like flying on the broom and all that stuff. That actually came from confessions of witches that were being tortured. So this stuff is coming from the colonizers' eyes. From mostly a Spanish perspective, like Spanish anthropologists, things like that. And this is modernly that might be not kind of okay, but if we're studying history, I mean, a European anthropologist who was probably well-to-do or whatever, who traveled to Mexico to actually do a study on the natives, probably was very biased. I think at that, especially in those times. I mean, I don't think they. A lot of times that it's just like the Native Americans here in the United States. I mean, most of the stuff we know because here's the thing: the Spanish and the English up here, the native languages they believed were terrifying, that they were curses, and so if they spoke their language, not only would they not understand you or refuse to understand you, you could actually be physically attacked for speaking a native tongue, and this is like the Wild West kind of stuff, right? And
yeah.
in Mexico it was the same thing. You could actually be attacked because they believe they don't know what you're saying. You could be saying, hey, you're people do that sometimes with it. People don't speak Spanish at all. They'll call him, Gordo or something, and you're like, you just tell them, oh, Gordo means, a good guy, right? And it really means a fat guy, right?
That
So,
guy.
stuff like that, they play jokes. So they, but in the old West, and 100 years ago, 200 years ago, people, when you did that stuff to people, not only did you make them look like a fool, but they also considered that like a curse, like physically, like cursing, jinxing them, where their family could die
Well,
of
see,
starvation this winter
they're
because this guy played some stupid joke with a native language on me, right? Or they would
their
see that as an
ignorant
omen,
mindset will just take off and they'll be like, oh, I don't know what they could be saying
Yeah.
some evil curse thing in their language, so they get paranoid.
Yeah,
But
and that's why you get the native languages up here. They actually made them change their names and translate it to English, which you don't see that so much in Mexico, right? Or maybe it's some in Spanish, right? But like so, you ever see a lot of Native American, like Crazy Horse, right? Crazy Horse is a famous Native American, right? I mean, that wasn't really what he called himself at home, right? I'm sure, right?
right,
But they literally made him like if they said, "What's your name?" and you answered in the native tongue, they would consider that a curse, and if you were surrounded by soldiers, they might say, "Hey, you're making my grandmother die during the winter with that cursed language, right?" Because they didn't know had any idea what it was, right? Some of them, I'm sure, were more would learn the language and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, what's interesting about this too is you know how people in the deep south, how they talk real slow and sometimes it's really hard to understand them, and each place has their own like accents, but especially like in the south and things like that, they have the draws like how are y'all
Yeah.
doing, and they kind of mumble a little, right? So
Right.
what that comes from, and the different accents, this comes from that is at one time, after the Revolutionary War, they the U.S. There was a movement in the U.S. to like not speak English so much because we just beat the English, we just threw the English off, so so some of them were speaking kind of like the native. They started speaking the native tongues, and that became their just Texas draw accent or their deep South accent, and then also obviously mixed with African influences from the slave and slavery trade in the South and everything. So that had a lot to do with it too. Modernly everybody talks kind of like in a different way, and that
Yeah.
came from not wanting to speak English, right? And you'll see, yeah, and you'll see it's really horrible what they did to Native Americans up here with that, because you'll see it's like a Native American guy will be called like like Jim Blackbird or something, right? And like so they literally, he said, well, this is what they call me in my language. And don't say the language. What does it mean in English? And then he just point to a black bird and they say, okay, your name's Blackbird now, right? Don't say nothing except Blackbird. Don't even speak that. They would have schools where they would beat the kids really badly if they spoke their native languages, because they were like, they were Catholic schools or whatever. And this is especially this was even more so within the Hispanic native, I think, but there was also the Native Americans up here with the English more influence, but the Spanish in Mexico, the same thing. That's what the missions were. I mean, that's why, because I'm from California, I was raised here and educated here. We would have to like make things about the emissions, like because those were the first settlements here essentially, right? Then there was a gold rush and the whole history of
Right.
California.
Yeah.
So but the missions, they're touted as being, these really like sanctuaries, where they built these, and they did that to help the natives so they could come and like, not die and stuff. And that did happen sometimes, I'm sure. But they also ran schools where they were brutal with the natives, and this is, throughout all the Americas that I could see, that these schools were kind of like re-education camps. So whatever they say,
I
they were raised by their native speaking
uh
people, and then they would go there and they'd say, you don't even speak that language. They'd cut their hair because a lot of natives would have the longer hair or whatever. I mean, whatever. I don't know if there's any thing in the Nahuatl. I don't know enough about those natives to know if they actually drew their hair long or had some ornaments, but they'd remove all that ornaments and try to
yeah.
make them as white
But
looking as possible or
you
whatever.
know, I
You know,
think I think that was I think all the indigenous people got it bad and got treated that way. Whether
yeah.
you're in the US or in Mexico or all through South America, I think all the indigenous people got treated that bad. But but yeah, man, it's been a good talk about um Santa Muerte and
Yeah.
the gods of death of the Aztec religion and so forth. But yeah, man, thanks for your time for coming on to Mesoamerican Spirituality 5, and it's been nice adding you to this series.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah,
I hope we could do more
yeah,
of these. Yeah.
of course, yeah, yeah, we'll definitely do more of these. And anyone who wants to check out all of Guion's links below in the video description. Everyone who's watching, make sure you like and subscribe to Dark Sorcery.